Hi, I'm John Galenzi, Apple's User Experience Evangelist and Director of Software Technology Evangelism. Designing for iPhone is exciting and fun and opens up a whole new world of possibilities for your software given the characteristics of iPhone. In this video, I'll lay the groundwork for how you should approach the design of the user interface of your iPhone application. Whether mobile application development is entirely new to you, or you're a pro having developed software for other mobile phones, you'll gain valuable insight into what it takes to deliver a really great user experience in your iPhone application. With over 300 patents and now the availability of the iPhone SDK, iPhone is years ahead of any other phone available today and completely redefines what users and now developers like yourselves can do. Let's begin by taking a close look at the unique characteristics of iPhone. Understanding its character and what users expect will help you build something that feels like it belongs on iPhone. iPhone's user interface is revolutionary. From a hardware point of view, it supports multi-touch, which senses touch, and enables the flick, tap, and pinch gesture, which make iPhone so compelling and natural. It has a gorgeous display that's large, bright, and high contrast. And that's super high resolution at 160 dots per inch, making it perfect for incredible animation and rich visuals. So, clearly, design is essential for anything running on iPhone. Now, just as designing a home calls for a plan, so does designing an application that feels completely at home on iPhone and completely familiar to users. Designing for iPhone requires an attention to detail and focus on iPhone characteristics that's different from what you'd employ designing applications for the desktop or for smartphones and PDAs. Developing an application for iPhone requires a great degree of design and a state of mind that may not be second nature to you. In particular, if the bulk of your experience is in developing desktop applications, you need to be aware of the significant differences between designing applications for mobile versus desktop. One of the first things to keep in mind is that on iPhone, hands are the exclusive input device, not a mouse or external keyboard. This fact alone will impact your design in significant ways, since you won't be able to rely on scroll bars or pop-up menus, for example, or any sort of interaction that would typically be performed with a mouse. So, focus your design on allowing users to manipulate information directly via tapping and dragging. Since there's no external keyboard either, you'll have to make a big effort to minimize the amount of information users have to type before anything useful is accomplished. Focus on allowing users to make simple choices and to pick from lists as opposed to requiring them to enter values manually via iPhone's on-screen keyboard. And do everything you can to remember things about the user from their past interactions. The more information your application can remember about the user from the last time they used it, the quicker you can get them doing something useful the next time they use it. Another significant design consideration is that the screen real estate available to you on iPhone is substantially less than what you'd have available for your application on the desktop. This fact dictates only one viable option for you to pursue, and that is to be very selective about what features and capabilities you bring to the iPhone. It's not acceptable to simply shrink your desktop application down to iPhone. This would make your application unattractive and difficult to use, since users would spend a lot of time panning and zooming just to find the user interface elements they want to interact with. Not to mention the fact that 90% of the features of your desktop product are most likely used by a minority of your users and aren't useful to mobile users. So focus your design on the essentials. There simply isn't room to include design elements that aren't absolutely necessary. Now, it's important to put my last comments into perspective. While it is true that the iPhone screen is small when compared with, say, the screen of a 17-inch MacBook Pro, it's also accurate to say that it's far bigger, brighter, and higher resolution than almost every smartphone or mobile phone available today. In fact, this is one of the most exciting aspects of designing for iPhone. If you're already developing mobile applications, you now have a lot more space available to you than what you're likely used to. And this opens up all kinds of new possibilities in terms of the design of your application. You can now display more content and make things look far more attractive. Let's dig into this a little bit more. Here's a breakdown of popular PDAs for sale on mysimon.com based on screen resolution. Combining all the PDAs with screen resolutions lower than 320 by 480 results in a total of 94% of the units. This means that if you've been developing mobile applications for any of these devices, the amount of screen real estate available to you has been a fraction of what's available to you on iPhone. Just think of the possibilities on a larger screen. That being said, use this extra space available on iPhone for additional user content. More photos, more messages, more video, or more detail, rather than more buttons, sliders, and switches. Something else to keep in mind when designing for iPhone is the fact that only one application can run at a time, and running your application in the background is not an option. This means that when users switch to another application, answer the phone, or check their email, the application they were using quits. So it's important to make sure that users do not experience any negative effects because of this. Be sure to save information about your application's current state before you quit. Keep track of which screen the user was on, what content was being shown or being authored by the user, and what mode your application was in, and bring the user back into the same place and state they left your application in. So those are many of the core characteristics that make iPhone unique, all of which you should be intimately familiar with before you begin designing your own iPhone application. Now let's look at the next thing to do, which is to clearly define exactly what it is you're building. Now this phrase seems like common sense. Implement solutions, not features. And yet it's so easy to focus all your engineering effort on features, isn't it? I see it all the time as I work side by side with developers like yourself on product designs. Designing features while losing sight of the bigger picture means you end up building products that are technically strong, but not very usable. Shrinking a desktop application onto the iPhone ignores the fact that building an elegant solution to a specific problem is much more valuable to users than an application that's a host for dozens and dozens of features. iPhone users are more likely to be in a hurry or on the move. Remember, they're mobile. The typical usage pattern is that users access their iPhones many times throughout the day, yet each time they access it, it's for very short periods of time. They answer a call, they look something up, they check email, send an SMS, and more. These tasks are very discrete in nature, and yet each is accomplished with a separate application that's an optimized solution. The design process for your iPhone application, too, should yield an easy-to-use, highly focused product that offers a very discrete set of functionality. The best way to not lose sight of the big picture solution you're trying to deliver is to have it clearly defined in the first place. Before you begin designing your application, it's essential to define precisely what your application does. A good way to do this is to craft an application definition statement, or goal statement if you will, a concise declaration of your application's main purpose and its intended audience. Once crafted, it's critical that this statement be agreed upon and adhered to by everyone involved with your product, product managers, engineers, designers, and so on. Make sure this statement guides everything you do and that it acts as a filter for every feature you want to add or design decision you try to make. Without an application definition statement, your development will be focused entirely on features and technology rather than on the big picture solution you'd hope to build. Ultimately, the end result will be a product that isn't what users really want. Let me give you an example. Here we have a list of features for iPhoto. Now this isn't a complete list, but it is enough to illustrate my point. The key question here is this: does this list of features really communicate what iPhoto is all about? Not at all. In fact, there are other competing products which have some of these same features. The secret to what makes iPhone great is the fact that we worked very hard to design a solution instead of a host for lots of features. Deciding which features made sense was much easier once we'd clearly defined the solution our users needed. Okay, so an application definition statement is comprised of two parts. Part 1 defines what your solution is. In this case, it's a product offering easy-to-use photo management. Part 2 clearly defines who your users are. Defining who your users are is so key since different users have different abilities, needs, and terminology. For example, imagine if this statement finished with the words "for professional photographers." If it did, we'd end up designing Aperture rather than iPhoto. If this statement ended with the words "for medical imaging professionals," we'd end up with a sophisticated medical imaging tool. So clearly, an application definition statement is extremely useful in determining the boundaries of functionality and usability, and having one of these in place before you begin your work will ensure everyone is working towards the same goal. So here's the thing. Every exercise in designing an application for iPhone should begin with determining what the minimum number of features are that are required to achieve the goal of your application. Avoid attempting to recreate every nuance of the desktop version of your application on iPhone. It's not acceptable to simply shrink your desktop application down to iPhone. This would make your application very difficult to use. Focus instead on implementing the few features that are the most frequently used by the majority of your users. Now, the best way to understand how to pick appropriate features is to see how we did it during the design of two familiar iPhone applications. Let's begin with iPhoto for macOS X and Photos on iPhone. The first thing to do when you're taking an application or solution on the desktop to iPhone is to determine your core set of functionality. And the easiest way to determine core functionality is to review the primary things users do with your application. iPhoto on macOS X helps with three key tasks for Mac users: organizing, editing, and sharing their digital photographs. And the most common of these is sharing. Everyone shares their memories in the form of digital photographs, either with themselves or with family and friends. So when we designed Photos on iPhone, we focused on sharing. We reviewed features in iPhoto one by one to determine if they should be implemented in Photos on iPhone, and rejected anything that would hinder the ability of users to share photos. This is the same process you should go through for any application you're designing for iPhone. The end result of this feature filtering process for iPhoto is a simple, streamlined application on iPhone that makes sharing your photos a pleasurable and engaging experience. And we all know how this works, right? To view a photo, users just tap on any thumbnail from an album or a photo library and then immediately see the selected photo in full screen portrait or landscape orientation. Flicking moves easily between photos and pinching zooms in. It doesn't get any easier than this. Now, the feature selection process I discussed a moment ago was even applied to the user interface for the iPhone itself. The Photos user interface revolves around photos, so much so, in fact, that parts of the user interface can be hidden. When you choose to view a slideshow or flip through your photos manually, the Photos application hides the navigation bar, toolbar, and even status bar, and displays transparent versions of these elements only when you need them. This is really valuable guidance to consider if your application is media-centric in particular. The second example I'd like to discuss is Mail on macOS X versus Mail on iPhone. Rather than implement all of the features available, Mail on iPhone accommodates only the most frequently used features of Mail on macOS X. Similar to iPhoto, all Mail users use Mail first and foremost to read, write, and organize email. This then is its core set of functionality. Clearly, there isn't enough room on iPhone's screen to support the user interface that would be required for all of the Mail on macOS X's capabilities. And more importantly, while many of these features are highly desirable in a desktop environment, they'd be very infrequently used by iPhone users. So, Mail on iPhone implements the core set of functionality of Mail on macOS X and only allows users to read, write, and organize mail messages in multiple mailboxes for multiple email accounts. And it does this with a very simple, clean user interface that's easy to navigate and use, and which provides valuable at-a-glance information about the current mailbox and messages within it. iPhone users are more likely to be in a hurry or on the move. After all, they're mobile. Because of this, they need information that's easy to read and parse on screen. And their most frequent tasks should be upfront and not more than one tap away at any given time. Carefully selecting which features you implement within your iPhone application will ensure these needs are met. Now I'd like to talk about what's involved in designing for ease of use. Obviously, since almost anybody can use an iPhone after a few minutes of seeing how things work, ease of use is a core attribute of every application and iPhone overall. Your application should be designed to be extremely easy to use, and the best way to achieve this is to remember that simple and straightforward is best. Ease of use also comes from, among other things, providing a well-organized and easy-to-follow workflow. Ensure your object and screen hierarchy parallels your user's mental or cognitive model. An obvious example is found in Mail, where every user expects messages to be contained within mailboxes, and we reflect this exact model in the order that screens are displayed. Now, typically, as users traverse object hierarchies from top to bottom, your iPhone application should be cascading users through screens of information that are progressively becoming more detailed. In other words, as users come closer and closer to the end node of your information hierarchy, they should be seeing more and more specific information as opposed to what they'd see on the screen representing the root node of your system. This diagram illustrates the manner in which this should be implemented within your iPhone application as users move from screen to screen. Here, in Settings, the choices available to the user become more and more specific as they cascade through the hierarchy of settings. Designing a clean and uncluttered layout for each screen of your application increases legibility and discoverability and gives you the opportunity to emphasize the information that really matters to users. Remember, if users use their iPhone for short periods of time, many times throughout the day, it's really important that they're able to quickly and easily read the information presented by your application on screen. So keep your color palette simple. Group related items. Be consistent with your typeface, style, and sizes. Align labels and values. And add equal spacing between groups or major screen elements for easy visual navigation. Also, watch out for putting text or images too closely to the edge of any screen. Always leave equal amounts of space between an item and the screen's edge, and the item and the things above or below it. Placing text or images too close to the edge of the screen may cause users to believe the screen can be scrolled or that there's more information hidden off-screen. Providing finger-sized targets for tapping is vital in ensuring your application is easy to use and frustration-free. As I said before, iPhone users are typically on the move, walking, riding, or what have you, and so it's not uncommon for users' taps to not be in exactly the right spot. Make sure all of your tap targets are a minimum of 44 points square, even though visually they might appear to be slightly smaller. Here's Calculator. You can see how every control is obvious and easy to tap. And here's Calendar demonstrating the same concept. The controls are shaped differently, but they're easy to tap and it's obvious what's tappable too. The keyboard, mouse, and large display commonplace in the desktop environment are perfectly suited to repetitive tasks like copy-paste, entering usernames and passwords, and scrolling around to find information that matters. But not so on iPhone, where it's critical to get users to the information that matters to them as quickly as possible. So avoid undue process or interaction before users can get anything useful done. For example, remember everything you can about your user, like their zip code, telephone number, email address, and more, so that they're not forced to enter this information again and again each time they use your application. Also, where applicable, use device information such as the current location to automatically make decisions for users rather than asking them redundant information. Go out of your way to optimize for your users' time. Zooming and panning should be avoided wherever possible also. While multi-touch makes pinching and dragging easy, these gestures shouldn't be required unless absolutely necessary. If every time a user interacts with your iPhone application they're forced to zoom or pan to read valuable information on screen, you're slowing them down and dramatically reducing the usability of your application. Scrolling is easy with a simple flick gesture, so organize information on screens with the most frequently accessed information at the top and the least frequently accessed information at the bottom, grouped into sections containing related information if necessary. Consider how this impacts the design of the phone book, where, within the context of using the phone, a contact's phone number is the information most frequently accessed, as opposed to their street address. Make a big effort to minimize the amount of information users have to type before anything useful is accomplished. Allow users to pick from lists as opposed to requiring them to enter values manually via iPhone's on-screen keyboard. Tapping a list entry to reveal another list, and so on through multiple list screens, is far more efficient way of drilling down to a specific choice than is typing the specifics into a text field. And the same is true for pickers, which are perfectly suited for lists of predictable, related sets of information such as dates, times, colors, sizes, and quantities. But beware of overusing pickers. If you're used to developing on other mobile platforms, you may find yourself tending towards pickers more often than we'd recommend. Pickers are great, but shouldn't be your default option in all cases. Sometimes, for picking a single item from a list, it's easier to cascade users to a second screen containing an edge-to-edge list from which they can quickly scroll and pick. Check out how setting an alarm works in the clock application. Okay, so there you have a few tips for how to design for ease of use. Now let's talk about ensuring consistency, which is key. Designing for consistency means that the goal for your application is to have an appearance that matches the rendering style and rich visual appearance of iPhone, and that it behaves as expected when compared with similar capabilities and applications. The easiest way to ensure consistency is to use the standard controls available to you in UIKit. Standard controls have a consistent appearance and behavior across all iPhone applications and allow users to work in an environment that's predictable and familiar. Now, to be clear, not all of the controls you see displayed here are necessarily available at this time within UIKit. My point is simply that it's these types of elements that are used everywhere in your application on iPhone, and you should do everything you can to use the built-in controls available to you so your application fits in too. Another way to ensure consistency is to properly use certain on-screen indicators like disclosure buttons. There are two types of disclosure button, and each conveys different meaning to users, so it's important that every application uses them consistently. The first disclosure button style is the single arrow. Use this to indicate to users that more information on another screen will be revealed if they tap anywhere on the row. The second disclosure button style is the single arrow on a circle background. Use this to indicate to users that it's a separate control from the row or item it's on, and as such, will take them to different information than if they tapped on the row itself. An example of this is in Settings Wi-Fi, where tapping a row selects a specific network, and tapping the blue disclosure button reveals detailed configuration options for the listed network. Finally, once you're sure you've delivered your core set of functionality and done all of the other things I've just talked about, the last thing to do is go the extra distance to surprise and delight your users. Let me explain more specifically how we did this using a few examples. We added photos to contacts and then went the extra mile to make sure photos could be taken in context by tapping the actual photo on a contact's info screen, rather than forcing users into the more complicated workflow of having to hit the home button, launch the camera application, take a photo, and then return to contacts. Displaying information visually like this means it's more readily recognized by users. In this case, adding a contact's photo means users have quick confirmation that they've picked the right person. A text-only representation wouldn't necessarily provide enough confirmation for users that they'd selected the right person. They'd have to review email address, telephone number, and more before they were sure they'd picked the right contact. So think about your application and the design you're planning. Aim to streamline things for users in similar ways. Another way we enhance things with a more visual representation of information is by displaying rich album art on the Now Playing screen in iPod, instead of only displaying the album title in text. Showing album art means it's dead easy to confirm the album that's currently playing. And showing rich visuals like this can dramatically increase the appeal of your application as well. Animation is also used throughout the entire iPhone user interface to add realism and provide rich feedback to users. For example, animation is used when deleting mail messages and notes, when moving mail to folders, and when purchasing music. You've all seen this. We added animation to the Maps application to reveal features with the page curling upwards and downwards, and when dropping a pin to indicate a location. And we integrated the flick gesture to, for example, greatly enhance photo viewing in Photos, and page selection in Safari. Finally, we used a simple wiggle animation to indicate a mode change on the home screen, allowing users to customize icon positions. In each of the animation examples you've just seen, we could have used boring next and previous buttons to move between images or pages, but instead decided that direct manipulation made the experience much more realistic, fun, and approachable. And so the challenge for you is this: where will your iPhone application be able to do the same? So that's it. Clearly, designing for iPhone requires special effort and a focus on these 6 key goals. The end result will be awesome if you dig in and make design a priority. The definitive place to look for iPhone SDK developer resources is developer.apple.com/iPhone, where you'll find orientation videos, technical documentation, and lots of sample code. Of particular note, this is also the place where you'll find the iPhone Human Interface Guidelines, a fantastic must-read resource for anyone involved with the design and development of your iPhone application. Finally, feel free to contact me at galenzi@apple.com for guidance with the design of the user interface for your iPhone application. So there you go, a series of high-level guidelines you should be familiar with as you design for iPhone. Now remember, when you're not sure about what you should do, look closely at the applications we designed for iPhone. We've solved many of the problems that you're likely facing, or we've done things that closely parallel what you might be trying to do. The phone and iTunes applications alone contain lots of valuable ways for doing things that you'll likely find really useful to review. Searching, indexing, organizing, we have segmented views, tab bars, mode changes, and much more. I'm sure it's clear to you now that designing for iPhone is different from what you do designing applications for the desktop. You know, iPhone brings unique characteristics to the table for designers and provides an awesome environment for doing new, exciting, and innovative applications that your users are really going to want. iPhone development is a new frontier and provides you with extraordinary opportunities. I really look forward to what you're going to do and hope to see your creative and focused solutions on iPhone soon.